The One Ring Realms of the Three Kings is a setting expansion and adventure module for the One Ring RPG by Free League. This one details elves and elven society, locations, and culture in the context of role-playing in the end of the Third Age of the Lord of the Rings setting. I covered the One Ring core rules in another video. The game is basically a second edition revival of a Lord of the Rings RPG originally published in 2011 by Cubicle 7. Free League brought in the original designers Francesco Nepitello and Marco Maggi and revived the game in 2022. Since the publication of the second edition, there has been an aggressive rollout of supporting products for the game, including, at the time of this recording, a Lore Master's screen and Rivendell compendium, a starter set, an adventure module called Ruins of the Lost Realm covering Eriador, an adventure compendium called Tales from the Lone Lands, and then of course Moria Through the Doors of Durin, which I covered in a video on this channel, and now Realms of the Three Rings. Each of these books and products is also published in parallel by Free League as a separate game called Lord of the Rings Role-Playing, which has all the same artwork and writing, except the rules are keyed to the D&D 5th edition SRD, as opposed to Nepitello's and Maggi's more thematically tuned mechanics. In this review, I want to share with you the digital version of Realms of the Three Rings, which is a relatively short document, but offers a surprising amount of detail and play possibilities. And towards the end of the video, I want to point out some reasons why players might actually hate visiting the Elven realms. There are only 3 chapters in this book, and the first one starts with a short, digestible history of the Eldar, the first elves, beginning with their awakening in the east and continuing through the First Age, covering the invitation to Valinor that separated them into light elves, dark elves, and gray elves. The Wars of Beleriand were where light elves returned to Middle-earth as exiles to pursue Morgoth, the first Dark Lord and primordial source of evil, after he stole the Silmarils, these 3 legendary jewels crafted by an elf. By the way, this book doesn't actually describe who Morgoth is or what the Silmarils are. I had to look all that stuff up myself. You could also read The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien, but I think it would have been a lot cooler if they had just included this basic info in the book. Anyway, it goes on to describe the fateful creation of the Rings of Power by the Smiths of Eregion, which I think at this point as a GM is probably worth looking into a bit. And the history wraps up with how some elves departed west while those remaining in Middle-earth established the 3 Elfland refuges maintained by the magic of the 3 rings themselves, which is a perfect setup for the melancholic twilight atmosphere that should permeate any adventures involving the Elflands of this setting in this particular period. Special rules for visiting Elflands explain how these magical locations affect travelers, creating an almost unearthly feeling of peace and wonder, a narrative layer that's actually reinforced by mechanics. The timelessness rule establishes that when a company enters an Elfland and plans to stay for more than a few days, they automatically initiate a fellowship phase, which in this game is like a downtime phase. The Speak No Evil rule allows heroes to remove shadow scars while in Elflands, and special Yule rules outline who may spend this special fellowship phase in Elven realms, creating a nice sense of exclusivity and privilege for Elven PCs at least. Lindon is the first of 3 Elven lands, and it's introduced as what remains of ancient Beleriand, now mostly sunk beneath the waves. This is a recurring theme, that of faded glory, which defines Tolkien's treatment of the elves. The realm is described as divided into several lordships, with Círdan the Shipwright having ruled over it for thousands of years. Most notably here is Narya, the Ring of Fire. This is one of the 3 Elven Rings of Power, and the only 3 not under the control of Sauron's The One Ring. Each of these rings has a subtle power that sort of sustains the Elfland that it resides in. Incidentally, Narya was passed on to Gandalf the Grey, yet Lindon still benefits from its magic. Haeland, the so-called Western Haven, is lavishly detailed, described as a city of stone and marble on a rocky promontory. with an awesome area map and detailed key location descriptions. One thing you'll notice about these Elfland locations is that there's hardly any conflict. PCs who find themselves in Lindon are not going to be doing any battle. At most, they'll get drawn into one kind of social conflict or another. There's another elven city detailed in this realm of Lindon called Nevland, the Eastern Haven. And it's presented as larger and more cosmopolitan than its sister city, creating a nice contrast that gives players different experiences depending on which haven they visit. Oh, by the way, Círdan the Shipwright is still alive and kicking after thousands of years, and he's still in charge of these lands, at least in name. PCs can meet him and talk to him, I guess, although he's such a monumental figure in the lore of Lord of the Rings that I can only hope that a GM does him justice. Also, fun fact, Círdan means the shipwright, so his name is Shipwright the Shipwright. The 9 houses of Mythland are described as ancient institutions similar to guilds that organize labor, regulate professions, sponsor festivities, and ensure the safety of their members. These houses could provide instant hooks for Elven PCs who elect to be from Mythland. There aren't any mechanical advantages or rules associated with these elven houses, though. Rivendell, or Imladris, is introduced as a secret refuge between the perilous lands of Eastern Eriador and the Misty Mountains. Rules for finding Imladris explain how the enchantments of Rivendell and its master turn aside unwanted visitors, requiring a scan roll that's nicely balanced to make discovery challenging but not impossible. The settlement sits in the Hidden Valley, magically hidden from anyone who the elves do not want to find it. And it is hidden entirely through the magic of this ring, Vilya, the Ring of Air. The ring also provides perfect mild weather in the valley year-round, which is nice. Again, this game gives us a loving treatment of Elrond's house and its surroundings. I guess the creators of this game keep coming back to Elrond's house because it's one of the most serene and dreamlike places that the characters ever visit in both The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings books. It's just an attractive location to put into a loader RPG. Also, this is the Elven supplement for the game, so you have to have Elrond's house thrown in there somewhere. Again, these locations are not really keyed for combat encounters or really any kind of danger. I think I'd describe the Elflands as more or less domesticated locales. When you have your fellowship phase, you do roll on a table and meet special elves with whom you interact, but you're not fighting them or anything. At most, these are launch points or plot hooks for some possible adventure elsewhere. Oh, and here's Elrond half-elven himself. As the story goes, he brought a number of elven survivors to this valley after the War of the Elves and Sauron. He's been here a while, and he's just dying to introduce his daughter Arwen to your PCs and give you all the exposition you need for your next journey. Lothlórien is the third and final Elfland of the book. It's described as the most magical realm amongst those of the Eldar, existing almost outside of the confines of space and time. Rules for entering Lothlórien explain how this realm is one of the most closely guarded in Middle-earth, making it much more restrictive than Rivendell. If you recall from the books, the high security that the elves employ on visitors is exhaustively explored, but it's actually recapped here in the rulebook pretty nicely. The Golden Woods geography is detailed, including the Nath, the land shaped like a spearhead between rivers, Erin, Fernin, and surrounding territories. One of the biggest features of this Elfland is the Malorn tree, these huge trees that the elves build livable platforms on called Talanes. There are actually some dangerous regions of this forest, including this southern part where you might encounter, quote, orcs and other fell creatures. Though the book doesn't provide an encounter table or anything for this area. Anyway, instead of a monster table here, you get an elf minstrel song table to roll on when you're in the fellowship phase here. The most notable NPCs in this whole book, besides Elrond himself, are the ultra-ancient rulers of Lothlórien, Celeborn and Galadriel. Galadriel wears one of the elven rings of power called Nenya, the Ring of Water. It has a similar magic to Vilya in that it keeps Lothlórien shrouded in mist, and it also helps those giant Malorn trees grow and thrive in the region when normally they wouldn't do so. I was really moved by this one term found here. It says, "They have dwelt in the West since the days of the first dawn, and throughout the ages they have fought the long defeat together." The long defeat, that just says so much about the elves at the end of the Third Age in this setting. They've been in decline for thousands of years and are slowly immigrating off the continent. It's controversial for elves to stay behind, and ultimately, they are all expected to leave the land of Middle-earth eventually. This exodus being described as the long defeat was just perfect. The next chapter covers a few adventures, all based on the devious plans of Sauron himself. It opens with a brief explanation of how the elves' power is waning while Sauron's hatred for them remains undiminished. As the story goes, the elves have defeated and stymied Sauron over and over for thousands of years. We learn that Sauron's focus has generally shifted from the elves, but his desire for vengeance against them remains, which creates a narrative backdrop for several adventures, or sort of mini-campaigns. Perils of the Last Road introduces Morlos, the Dark Whisperer, an unhoused elf spirit who blocks the paths to the Grey Havens. I don't want to give away too much about the setup here, but I do want to point out that the illustrations in each of these Free League One Ring books is always so good, and this may be one of my favorite out of this particular book. This mini-campaign includes a handful of NPCs, and a backstory timeline that can help GMs couch the action in a relatively rich context. Memories of Ancient Wounds focuses on Cauthlin, a weasel spirit with a vendetta against the elves of Rivendell. At the risk of spoilers here, I have to point out that these vengeful spirits are not easily killed or defeated. They require special weapons, items, or other means besides direct combat, which is a great feature, I think, as long as the GM gives players enough information to discover those ways to defeat the enemy. Also, I really love this foil to the Great Eagles, a giant, intelligent carrion bird. Actually, now that I think about it, there's another really smart backstabbing bird featured in the Moria supplement for this game. This setting just has lots of big birds that you can talk to and negotiate with, I guess. Old Hatreds May Still Breed War is the title of the last of these mini-campaigns, and centers around Sauron's plot to pit elves against dwarves. I think the setup on this one is a little convoluted, but the heart of it is solid. You can always tweak a bit of the backstory here to make it more believable if you want. In fact, earlier in the chapter, the book advises you to change anything and everything in these mini campaigns to best fit your group and your playstyle. And again, more amazing artwork that really brings these major NPCs to life. They throw in a few more adventure hooks at the end of the chapter, but honestly, I think these would have been much better if they had statted out the main enemy alluded to in each of these. They're cool ideas, but the GM is going to have to put in some real work to make these into anything playable. Chapter 3 introduces 12 distinct locations scattered across the Elven realms, each using the same modular format established in previous The One Ring supplements. I think the best way for me to show you each of these adventure sites without spoiling them is to just show you the map of each and give you a very short synopsis. Ostbrunelen is a dark, imposing fortress in northern Lindon where the last remains of a noble house of Elven exiles dwell. Players might become embroiled in court politics or help defend the northern frontier against encroaching threats. The Palace of the Seabirds is an ancient elven mansion on an island off the coast, now inhabited by an unusual society with a majestic king. Adventurers could seek forgotten treasures or become entangled in the strange politics of the avian inhabitants. The Valley of the Dwarves is a network of 7 distinct valleys along the eastern foothills of the Blue Mountains, where dwarven communities continue ancient traditions. These locations provide opportunities for trade negotiations, cultural exchanges, or investigating tensions between elven and dwarven realms. The Vineyards of Glaria are terraced vineyards on a precipitous mountainside near Rivendell where ancient vines produce extraordinary wine. The isolated winemakers may need assistance with supplies during harsh weather or protection from those seeking their special vintages. The Wailing Hole is a hill in the Cold Fells with a reputation for supernatural occurrences and haunting sounds. Parties might investigate the truth behind local legends or use the location as an unexpected refuge with secrets of its own. The Winter Horn, a hidden dale high in the Misty Mountains where an ancient spirit's song can provoke terrible reactions from the mountain itself. Adventurers could find themselves mediating between primordial beings or preventing natural disasters through diplomacy rather than combat. The Falls of Nimrodel are a beautiful cascade where the legendary elf maiden Nimrodel once dwelled, still imbued with healing properties. The enchanted waters and surrounding area provide a perfect setting for encounters with woodland spirits or recovering lost elven artifacts. The Ruins of Dwarf Ferry is a dilapidated crossing point where traders and travelers once passed between lands, now abandoned but still strategically valuable. This border location creates natural opportunities for encounters with diverse travelers or for establishing a base of operations. The Singing Stones is the remnants of an elf lord's mansion in Holland, where travelers experience vivid dreams and songs seem to emanate from the stones themselves. The magical atmosphere makes it a good location for receiving prophetic visions or participating in uniquely elvish treasure hunts. The Hollow Wood is a mysterious forest with ancient ruins hidden beneath the roots of the trees, protected by a powerful guardian. Players could uncover the wood's secrets, negotiate with its protector, or rescue those who've become lost within its boundaries. The Isle of the Sorceress is a small island in a river crossing where elven magic creates confusion for those who approach uninvited. Adventurers might seek wisdom from the enigmatic inhabitants or help resolve conflicts between local communities. And finally, there is Whitehorn Hay, a large farm encircled by an ancient hedge where a family of elf friends has dwelled for generations. This welcoming haven could serve as a safe respite between adventurers or as a community worth defending when threatened by those who resent elven connections. The appendix contains basically three things: rules for how to play as a high elf of Rivendell, rules for how to play as an elf of Lothlórien, and a couple of pages to show you how to build an elf lord, which is an extra powerful warrior elf meant for solo play. So alright, here are my thoughts on the One Ring Realms of the Three Rings. Concerns. Limited lore primer. I found the first few pages setting up the overall lore of the elves at the end of the Third Age of Middle-earth to be a little lacking. The book does contain a lot of detail when it comes to specific mini-campaigns and NPCs, and that's really what matters in the long run here, but it might have been nice to have a stronger primer on the general history. No encounter tables. I know that most of the Elflands are safe and free of combat encounters, and that the One Ring is not an OSR dungeon crawl type of game where you're rolling up random encounters all the time, but it would have been nice to maybe have a list of potential foes to accompany the dangerous areas that are presented in the book. Rules for visiting Elflands could put off some players. For example, the cultural disconnect. The book emphasizes how alien elven perspective is to mortals. Elves care little for worldly wealth, treat mortals like children, and their realms have an otherworldly quality that can make players feel out of place. The supplement specifically mentions that elves may refuse to discuss deep or complex matters with mortals they don't trust. The exclusive nature. Especially in Lothlórien, there are many restrictions on visitors. The supplement mentions mortals are blindfolded when crossing into certain areas, are never left alone, and are constantly watched. This could feel restrictive to players used to freedom of movement. Heaven forbid these restrictions trigger murder hoboism in a player. Shadow effects. Visiting these magical places involves dealing with shadow mechanics. While there are benefits, like removing a shadow scar during a visit, some players might dislike the emotional impact these places have on their characters. Different time scales. The supplement emphasizes that time flows differently in these realms. Players may leave only to discover weeks or months have passed in the outside world, potentially disrupting larger campaign timelines. Pros. Captures the essence of Tolkien's elves. Between the elven NPCs and the potential conflicts across the mini-campaigns and landmarks, the supplement really captures the melancholic twilight of the elves perfectly. They are a dwindling species here, with 1 foot in Middle-earth and 1 foot out the door, and they have to be in permanent hiding in order to survive due to the machinations of the supreme bad guy, Sauron. Great vacationing. Most of the areas of the 3 Elflands aren't really set up for combat or major conflict. Just like in the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings books, characters are meant to find respite and beauty in these places, and maybe some mild social conflict. Mix of canonical locations and new creations. Hats off to writers Gabriel Quaglia and Francesco Nepitello for being able to mix old, established elven locations with a bunch of new ones that still feel genuine. Rules for visiting Elflands adds mechanical weight. As much as I think players might bounce off of the rules for visiting the Elflands, they each bring some mechanical force and weight to the locations. In the setting, visiting these places is supposed to be rare and life-changing. At the very least, reality altering. So the mechanics are really sort of necessary to enforce that. In the end, I think Realms of the Three Rings really does capture the twilight of the Eldar in Middle-earth, presenting these folks as playable characters and as interactable NPCs without diminishing their otherworldly nature. While some players might find the restrictions and cultural differences frustrating, that's entirely by design. The elves aren't just humans with pointy ears. For tables willing to embrace these differences, this book could provide some really memorable role-playing experiences that might actually recreate some of that magic from the books of visiting an elfland. Links for everything are below. Let me know your thoughts on this supplement and on the One Ring generally. And thanks as always for watching. I'll see you in the next one.